I'm happy to introduce Nathan Brown from Huffington Post, who's taking all of your picture, of course. Are you Huffington Post today, or are we saying Verizon?
Either one.
Okay, he's the GM of video at Huffington Post. We have Inbar Barak, who is the head of digital, primarily also video, of course, because it's near and dear to her heart, at marthastewart.com. And we also have Tom Wilde, who's the CEO and founder of Ramp, which is one of the leading OVP online video platforms out there, and maybe one of the first. Are you first?
Going back a ways.
Yeah, you guys are really early in that. And of course, Jocelyn Johnson moderating. She is the founder of the VideoInk, which hopefully you all read to learn a lot about video every day. Turn it over to you. Cool. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. So quite an interesting topic, talking about how, the opportunities and challenges that are facing content creators right now with all of the distribution opportunities. And we can actually, if you're tracking the news, you can we can add Spotify to that list of distribution opportunities now too. So I'd love to give you each a chance to just talk about your vantage point on the space very quickly. I think maybe the audience isn't familiar with Ramp. I think what Martha Stewart is doing on the video side. Our audience could probably use a little primer on that. Huffington Post a little more self-explanatory, but it'd be interesting to talk about what you guys are up to as well. So let's just run down the line very quickly and set the stage with that.
Sure. So we tend to operate behind the scenes with a lot of major media brands like NFL and Fox Sports and Meredith magazines, helping them get more value from video content. And so a lot of the challenges they face is really how to make their video more discoverable, how to make it more engaging, and how to generate some kind of ROI from it. Typically advertising, but it could be e-commerce or lead generation or things like that. So our technology platform enriches all the video content that they've produced with a much bigger set of metadata, better approaches to publishing and social, and helps them ultimately generate more ROI from the video content that they produce and match it to contextual offers or related content as well.
Can you just very quickly give kind of an actual use case scenario of one of the clients that you're working with and kind of how they're putting that into action?
Yeah. So Better Homes and Gardens would be a good example, one of the Meredith magazine properties. So if you watch any video on Better Homes and Gardens, that's entirely powered by Ramp. And while you're watching the video, there's a card that gets displayed to the right of the video, and it becomes synchronized with the contents of the video. So if someone mentions garlic in the video, it will show related recipes, including garlic. If someone says food processor, you'll get an ad for a blender immediately to the right of the video. And it's all synchronized to the timeline of that video. So we do the sort of typical commodity stuff of hosting, streaming, and coding, but make it much richer in terms of that interactivity. In addition, all those videos get published with a complete set of transcripts and tags, which helps with the video SEO and the video sharing as well. So that'd be a little case study in terms of what we do.
Awesome, great. Let's talk about.
So
Martha.
for us at MSLO, the company's background is rooted very much in TV, and some of the things that we've been tackling and really interested in the last couple of years, I would say 4 to 5 years, is really shifting from the perspective of producing video for TV only, and really taking advantage of the opportunity, both on owned and operated, but on distribution channels, which is the topic of our conversation, and really shifting the mindset of, one, thinking of the video and the monetization models to include not just owned and operated, not just channels that you fully control, but also shifting to create content, video content that lives well and creates engagement on those various platforms.
From a programming perspective, are you guys really looking at specific formats? Like, I know that a lot of the content is like tips and tricks and how to and some of the DIY, but how are you guys approaching like scripted or any of the other formatting?
It's a really good question. I mean, the background of the type of video that we created for TV was very service-oriented, and part of what we're learning and tackling with the different distribution platforms that we work with very closely is how some of our content becomes more entertainment-focused and less how-to and tips.
Okay, got it. Let's talk Huffington Post.
This is an interesting slide that I'm talking in front of.
Yeah, what's going on up here?
I don't know, but it's interesting. So at Huffington Post, it's all about creating great content, obviously, telling great stories. We're really focusing now on programming that content across, as Inbar said, across multiple distribution points, and being very unique and specific about the kinds of content we make for each of those platforms. So programming is very important, distribution is very important, and then obviously monetization is an important topic too. Probably not the fourth in that order, but certainly something that's an important part of the process.
So one of the interesting themes that I saw come out of the new fronts was this idea that all of the social platforms are really helping with marketing, like helping drive awareness of your content. So we'll start at Huffington Post. We'll definitely move on to the Martha Stewart side. But how are you guys viewing the content everywhere? Are you distributing your content everywhere, or are you splicing that up and using each one of the platforms in a promotional manner?
I think it started out as promotion, and now we're really trying to utilize getting the right piece of content in front of the right person at the right time on the right platform. And so just like every publisher, we were really at Huffington Post and most of the others, I can't speak for MSLO, but I'm sure it's the same based on what you said. It was all about driving traffic, using these social platforms to drive traffic back to our O&Os. And I think, the switch has really been made, that it's really about using distribution and reaching that person on the platform that they're consuming content, rather than just trying to drive them back. And there was a big fear with publishers that it would be cannibalizing their sort of rich property that they have. But really, in my experience here and at other companies, it's that it's really more of a creative experience in terms of revenue and in terms of audience growth.
So from that side of things, on the revenue side, a lot of these distribution platforms don't have their monetization baked in just yet. Even a massive platform like Facebook doesn't have any type of rev share model baked in right now. And I would anticipate that's probably one of the challenges that we're supposed to be addressing on this side of things. So when you're looking at monetizing across all of these different platforms, how are you measuring the ROI and the value takeaway on some of that if there's not even economics really baked into it just yet? Either one, any of you. I think
I can take it first, but yes, that's a problem. There's no monetization on something like Facebook. It is coming. You can guarantee that Facebook's going to figure out how to scale a massive audience and then how to flip the switch and start to monetize that audience. They are in those discussions now, and I think it's you see some post-roll things that they're doing. I think with NFL content and very soon, I think that they'll start to beta different monetization strategies with publishers like ourselves.
How does that impact what you guys are doing, though, when you're evaluating the different platforms that you want to distribute content on, when there's really no inherent revenue that will come back to you just yet?
I mean, finding an audience with content is always a good thing. And Facebook, we're the #1 social publisher on the Facebook platform. And so we have a massive audience there. So for us, it is about audience. It's about building awareness. It's about tuning in. It's about driving traffic back to our platform as well. And so, really for us, it's looked at as that. It's sort of an audience development promotional platform. Once monetization gets turned on, that'll be really helpful for us, obviously. But we want to be there and have the audience and scale when it does.
And Inbar, how are you guys approaching that strategy in terms of even if Snapchat or Vine or Instagram, like all of those as well, don't have their revenue model really baked in yet?
Right. The distribution channels vary greatly in terms of what you can do on them. Some we have direct deals with. Some, Facebook is a good example. The models, the economic models, are just not there, or they don't match what the advertisers want as of yet, right? If you could start focusing on click per view versus other stuff, then you could be making money off of Facebook and you could be distributing and monetizing successfully. So I think partially it's really working very closely with our partners at Facebook, our partners at Snapchat, and at Vine to figure out how those can happen, and that's exactly what we're doing.
And Tom, on your side of things, I mean, you're talking about discovery and enabling discovery of video. It sounds like primarily on someone's O&O, on their owned and operated site. So what are you seeing in terms of how your clients are maybe leveraging other distribution platforms or solving their own discovery on a site that's not owned and operated by them?
Yeah, my background is last 20 years in the search business, and so you've seen sort of this fascinating shift from users looking for content. If you go way back, a viewer looking for content might be to tune to ABC at 8 p.m. on Wednesday, and then there became so much content online that Google and others showed up to solve that problem, but it was still very much I'm looking for something, I'm giving you a keyword expressing my interest. And now it's completely inverted where the content is actually looking for users, right? And so that content from brands like these guys being pushed out to things like Snapchat and Facebook out to where the audience is. And so it used to be optimizing for brand, I want to make sure I'm promoting my brand, to now I need to optimize for the audience and where that is. And the problem is it's a bit chaotic, and the advertisers are all sort of a little bit standing on the sideline saying, help us figure out what to do now, because we understood the old model, we don't quite understand the new model. The users do, right? They're happy to find the content, where they happen to be, and if it's relevant and somewhat curated either with humans or algorithmically, all the better, right? And you're going to see more engagement there. So that's when we hear from the kind of folks that we work with, they need help in the scale side of this, because the reality is, especially if you're in news or sports or infotainment, you can't curate your whole collection with humans. It's just impossible, and you can't do it fast enough, and that's another key component. So you have to combine some kind of algorithmic bootstrapping, which can either help an editorial process or even replace an editorial process to get that content in front of the user where they're looking for it.
And so if a publisher like a Huffington Post or like a Reuters is looking to distribute their content and have their content discovered on a different platform, do you think there's a particular strategy that they should employ to make sure that they're being seen on all of those different platforms? Or should it all drive back to their O&O in some capacity, and we're kind of using it as a marketing vehicle?
No, I think that ship has sailed. I mean, I think you'll still have an O&O business where you want to optimize for what happens when people come to your site. But the nirvana is, if there were sort of a Venn diagram, you'd have knowledge of content on one side and knowledge of audience on the other side. And that intersection is sort of the sweet spot where value gets created. And so when you're a content creator, understanding how to write good titles, how to have complete metadata, whether it's transcriptions or tags or thumbnails, all of that becomes raw material for the merchandising of that content, either on your property or send it out with a piece of content to these other properties so that they can make use of it. And when we hear from, what we hear is that, when content producers are talking to these distribution points, the distribution points are coming back to them saying, we need more and richer metadata and annotations and thumbnails so that we can plug that into our content discovery and recommendations technologies. Because the reality is there's going to be many, many of these, each has its own silo of sort of recommendations technologies, whether it's a Netflix or, or an iTunes or what happens on your own site. So making sure that sort of semantic information and that audience information travels with the pieces of content and kind of reports back to you what's happening with that piece of content is really critical.
Interesting. And on the data side, I mean, how are you guys tracking, I guess, where your content is being seen and how effective it's doing on some of these new platforms that are emerging? It seems like that also is a little bit of an uncharted area right now.
Yeah, it's really challenging. I mean, I think the whole idea of customer behavior and customer data is something that's really challenging when you're working on distribution platforms. It doesn't really matter what the platform is, it's pretty much a black box. The audience data is proprietary. And so you can do a lot of work on your end to tag, to meta, to match up with somebody else's taxonomies to make sure that your video is as discoverable as possible, but you're not actually getting the user behavior information where you can optimize what you're making and have an ongoing conversation with the audience that way. So that's definitely a big challenge.
So how do you guys make, because I find this fascinating about the television industry, there's sort of like whether the data is correct or incorrect, there's still like a pretty instant feedback loop, right? It's like we know that it got this rating and it's performing at this type of rating for so long or not, and then we decide to renew or cancel or however that process might flow. But that seems to not be so easy in the digital space. So how are you guys driving content renewals and production decisions when YouTube maybe has a direct feedback loop? You can look at view counts, but how are you benchmarking that? And how are you guys making decisions on what to renew and when and how long to wait?
It's a combination of analytics and instinct. I think we have a pretty good idea of a hit when we make it, just because it resonates so well with our editorial staff. But sometimes we're completely wrong too. But I do think even the data is very shallow. Clicks are clicks, and watch time is watch time, and so you can get some relatively good data and audience metrics behind that. And we just basically use that in the gut check for how we renew and how we program.
So does that end up, getting back to the content creator, does that end up being potentially more favorable for the content creator because you're committing to production regardless of performance, really? Whereas somewhat in television, it can be a tricky mix, right? Sometimes they're like, we're committed, we're going to make this, and it's going to go forward, and we're going to do a 12-episode order or a 6-episode order, and that's going to get made. And other times it's not the case, right? They'll pull the plug on something. So that's tough from the creative side, I think, in Hollywood. So would you say that it's more favorable then for the creators looking to do digital because it's sort of like it's a commitment, we're just going to gut check it and do it?
Well, I think so. I mean, the budgets are smaller than television, so there's a lot less risk from where we sit. And I think I do think that if you're a creator, there's a lot more buyers out there, and so for that reason alone, I think it's a good, healthy marketplace for people that are making content. So for that reason, I think they're in a really good seat.
I think that the challenge is you can get direct response of if what you're creating is working with the audience that you have. Where it's really challenging is developing the audience, understanding where they came from, who actually watched it, really figuring out if you can increase production to a specific segment. That's the information that's really missing. That's really the black box when you're talking about distribution channels. All that information that you have on O&O, and I completely agree. The ship has sailed. Nobody is looking at themselves, the publishers that I know, as just creating content for O&O. You really know now that the audiences don't jump from platform to platform necessarily. They stay on platform, and you want to serve them there. But then figuring out how you get to grow that segment that loved the specific show that you did is really very problematic.
Do we have any questions from anyone in the audience so far on anything that we've been covering? Yes.
So for those of us who are trying to make new forms of media and content, I guess I would ask, for those of us who are creating new media, video, is there anything from an analytics perspective while the product is soft that you wish you could ask for rather than trying to go back to existing products and then saying, can you tell us this, can you tell us that? What kind of metrics are you hungry for with respect to video?
So one of the things that would be super interesting is to know a little bit of the information behind the click, where users are coming from, what is the overlap with other channels, where you can do real audience development initiatives instead of just look at the video that you're creating as pure a one-liner marketing, because the distribution platforms, again, not all of them, but if we're talking about the social platforms, the economic models are still emerging. And so if we can get more of that information, it makes it that much more worthwhile.
I think that has to be, for at least larger media organizations, I think there's a little too much focus even today in the short term on figuring out what the rev shares should be. I think that's actually a problem much later down the road. I think the first negotiation should really be, what data are you going to be back about my content? I mean, it's great to get tons of views on Facebook, et cetera. I think the value exchange or negotiation with any of these third-party platforms should be, I need data. I mean, just what you said, behind the click. That's how we're both going to build value together. If you give me that data, I can create more content that is relevant to your audience, and eventually we're both going to make money on it. And I think that gets sort of not the sort of front billing that I think it should when all these distribution discussions are on the front page there.
Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Any others? Great. So one other thing that we talked about on our kind of pre-call and the discussion was, how do you really evolve your storytelling on each one of these platforms, right? And can you tell the same story? I mean, it seems like there are different parameters for each one: 15 seconds, 5 seconds, live, lives perpetually, doesn't live perpetually, as long as you want, as short as you want, right? Different audiences perhaps migrating, different age demographics perhaps being on each of one of these platforms. So how are you approaching storytelling and content creation for each of those platforms? I'll start with Inbar. Sorry.
So for us, I mean, the length of the content, the length of the video is less of an issue. Again, figuring out what type of content works on what platform and why is more important. But the thing that we've been tackling, and I think the maybe unforeseen issue that really is the thing that we're grappling with, is the quality of the content, right? A brand like MSLO is so known for the beauty of the visuals, so known for the beauty of the photography and the video. There's a lot of care and a big crew and perfect lighting and high def video. And that doesn't necessarily work, right? On some of these platforms, authenticity is translated into lower production, right? To not make it feel as done as you would have expected on TV or even on YouTube or even on distribution platforms like AOL, when you're really talking about the social platforms where there's such tremendous opportunity to get to an audience, the quality needs to be redefined, and what the brand stands for and what quality of the brand stands for needs to be redefined. So it's not taking away from the quality of the brand, but how that manifests through video is something that we're really testing out.
So when you're looking at the on the technology side of that, I mean, are you going native into the actual platform and saying, okay, if people are creating content using their cell phones, like we need to create content for Snapchat using our cell phones. We can't create video elsewhere, and or maybe it's an iPad or a different technology. What are you guys doing on that side to maintain that authenticity?
Right, so iPhone is a perfect example, really quick, very authentic, of the moment videos. I mean, there's not one answer. If we teach to roast a chicken, it will be a very specific type of video. And if Martha has a quick comment to the audience, it will be a very different type of video. But there's room to explore different types of technologies and different types of qualities, and the immediacy that that gives is very exciting.
Do you build that into a daily programming strategy then? So is there someone who's just, I'm going to be posting on Snapchat and I sort of have agency to do that? Or do you guys pre-program and like pre-plan? How orchestrated is that?
We're pretty pre-planned, but there, as opposed to what used to be where there's one group, production group that's very much about TV type video, that was the only agency to create video in the company, we now have multiple arms of abilities to actually produce video and publish them. So in every group, the marketing group produces video, the social group produces video, the TV group produces video. So it's widely distributed, and everyone does what we think the video should be doing on the different platforms.
And Nathan, you've been at a few different media companies as well. So how do you guys approach that from a programming and pre-planning perspective?
Yeah, I think my counterpart at AOL, Dermot McCormack, who runs video there, he says that platforms are the new day parts, which I think is really interesting. And I think that that's something that is really compelling for how we program. So we look at how our audience is consuming content on what platforms at what times, and we try to program based on that. So if it's in the morning, 7 to 9 a.m. and someone's commuting into work, and they're probably looking at their phone on hopefully not driving, but on the subway or something, we program very specifically and try to launch videos that they'll be consuming at that time of the day. And then we do that all the way throughout the day, whether it's a longer form during the day when they're most likely in front of their desktop, whether it's something that's geared more towards a tablet when someone's at home on the weekend on a Saturday. We try to be very, very specific about the kinds of content we're making and when we're programming it to meet that.
Interesting. I think we had a question in the back.
Sure. I wanted to ask you about native advertising and the editorial line. A lot of publishers have a hard time deciding what line to cross and where to go with native advertising, and your thoughts on that?
Go for it.
This is probably one of the biggest struggles at most publishers. for a good reason. I mean, the editorial staff wants to make the kind of stories that they want to make. They don't want to be seen as shilling or making commercials for a brand. But I think that there is a world that exists where everyone can win in that category, where the content is really good, it's very compelling, it's very editorial in nature, and it takes a lot of faith and a lot of trust from the brand and a really strong salesperson to help the brand understand why the content matters and why it fits their strategy. And then when we make content that solves both of those things, then everyone wins, right? I mean, we win as a publisher, the brand wins, and the audience wins. And if any of those things break down, then everyone loses. So it's a very complicated dance, but it's certainly very necessary, and I've seen it work, and it works really well when it does.
I completely agree with that. I think there's room for it, but it has to be done in a way where the brand that's working still has editorial control. The advertiser that is being utilized to create the content, or you create the content with them, is really a choice and a true fit. And then the end user also wins, but that line is going to be something that's negotiated all the time, which is why this is a solution that happens a handful of times a year and not something that's just run-of-the-mill like pre-roll.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of building on those points. It's a question of relevancy, right? I think something becomes more like content when it's more relevant to you, and when it's less relevant, a lot of times it feels just like advertising. And so, being able to make sure that piece of native advertising is well matched to that user, and even done so in real time, increasingly will be important, because then satisfaction with that content experience goes up if it really is relevant at that moment for you, right? If it's whether it's targeted to a specific gender or demographic or time of day, whatever it might be.
Well, it feels like we're at an interesting time as well, because a lot of the publishers are somewhat becoming glorified creative agencies, right? It's like even on the editorial text side, video and editorial both are now blurring the lines of, are we a creative agency and is that what we're doing, or are we a media brand and a content production and publisher, right? So it's kind of an interesting time for that. Any other questions out here so far? No? So I did want to ask you guys, kind of dovetailing right back into this concept of creating content that feels authentic. And also what Inbar, what you brought up a little bit earlier on the actual production side of things, right? Like the devices side. It seems like quality on cameras and smartphones is getting higher. There's maybe not necessarily the need to have full production teams and boom cams and like this whole built-out production. So how are you guys approaching that side of things? Are you using any interesting technology to innovate on that side from the actual device side?
Not more than what we spoke about before.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to use everything. I mean, we have a pretty massive digital studio here in New York where, we've spent several $1 million with, amazing 4K cameras and the whole bit, all the way down to exploring some of the newest technologies that are coming out that probably were talked about in earlier panels, like Rhino Bird and some of the interesting things that they're doing from a capturing perspective. And then everything in between. I mean, I think we want to have the full stack available to us so that we can try a lot of things out and see what works, and then keep doing what works.
Cool. We have a few minutes left. I want to go down the line and ask you guys to say what you think the biggest challenge is right now. And it may be something you already mentioned casually, but biggest challenge for storytellers and content producers given all of the distribution opportunities, and biggest opportunity. Challenge and opportunity.
For creators? Mm-hmm. I think the challenge is, it's kind of interesting because I think it's almost the same thing. The challenge is the fact that there's so many people out there creating. There's no barrier to entry anymore as a creator, so there's a lot of people out there trying to tell a lot of stories. The opportunity on the flip side is that there are so many people buying content right now, whether it's someone like Huffington Post or Netflix or YouTube or whomever it might be. I think the challenge is the barrier to entries are low, but the opportunity is that there's so many people out there looking for great content.
I think that The opportunity that is created with all these social platforms being video enabled, all these people looking for video is unbelievable. We can create more video to match more people's desires than ever before. I think the real challenge is figuring out how to do that sustainably until the economic models meet and catch up.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, which I touched on earlier, is understanding who your audience is now. Because it used to be something that you could kind of capture in a box and analyze, and now the audience is so dispersed and distributed. I think it's a big challenge to make editorial decisions about your content if you don't know who's responding to it and how they're responding to it. I do think the opportunity is content consumption continues to skyrocket, so it's not that people are consuming less content. They definitely are. And I think if you have something of a brand, being able to use that brand as a proxy for curation and quality, I think is a way to cut through a lot of the noise, because as we heard even on the live panel, potentially have tens of millions of little live broadcasters that are going to come online here in the next few years.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, right in the middle. I can repeat it as well if you can't get there. Or maybe we do this one first, Becca, and then we can get a mic to him in the meantime.
So I think when we think about content, right, we still use wonderful 20th century terms like audience, but we can follow people, right, around on digital media, and we can kind of potentially, using AI, machine learning, and computer graphics, customize and create individual films for one person, individual ad, right? We can completely customize everything, and then it'll be perfect fit. But somehow I don't see it happening in my lifetime. So, I mean, I think we have some examples of it, like a customized newspaper, like Google News, but we haven't really seen it in the video sphere. So, do you think you see any signs of this happening anytime soon? Like a kind of complete customization where a film and ad created just for me, completely by computers.
We clear on the question?
I think I understand. I think there are some technologies out there, like Watch It is one that comes to mind, that is really good at using data points and creating customized video sort of real time based on the data they're receiving. I think to your point or your question, when is it going to be fully customizable in a video scenario? Like I could foresee a world where that does exist, but I agree it's going to be maybe perhaps not in our lifetime.
Yeah, I like the Wrapped example earlier, where maybe it's not the asset gets created for you, but you get to sort of guide the asset more, the particular video that's put in front of you, with optional sort of storytelling and interactivity. That's maybe a step in that direction. I think the knowledge of sort of the audience data is getting to the point where instead of just thinking about it as a audience as sort of this blob, which I think, if you go back to broadcast television, you just had these huge kind of audience blobs. Now to a particular viewer, and even having an actual, almost a CRM relationship with that viewer ultimately into the future. That I think that's the next step before you get to what you described, which is very cool, but probably a little ways off.
I think we also have a couple of security issues on the way to solve for that. Right now, anybody that's looking at audiences is looking at them as segments and not as individuals, and so that we need to surpass that hurdle also.
There also is a interesting company approach that Mode is doing in terms of the way that they're distributing everywhere and then customizing video delivery. So you might want to take a look at that, because the way that they're approaching discovery and distribution is kind of interesting. We'll see it in the long tail if it works, but it's kind of an interesting approach. In the middle here.
So Jocelyn, you brought up the question of sort of content creation. And Nathan, you sort of said there's no barrier to entry. Tom, you said we're going to have millions of people coming on and doing these sort of things. So sort of proliferation of content is maybe not a problem. Can anyone make a living doing it? Or what's the percentage of people who are creating this content where there's no barrier to entry? What's the percentage of people who are actually going to be able to make a living doing it?
I think some of it doesn't change, right? I mean, how many starving actors are there in Hollywood? Not everyone can do it because not everyone's good at it. And so at the end of the day, the content still has to be good. It just means now that there are many more places where you potentially can get your content seen. And I think the barriers are lower for sure. But at the end of the day, you still, content is about good storytelling or about being relevant to an audience. And I'm not sure that barrier's changed because of technology.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's all comes back to the quality of the filmmaker and the quality of the story. I mean, there's people like Freddie Wong and others on YouTube that were rubbing two nickels together and to make these films that have been incredible, and you've seen them rise to sort of historic levels. I think it all just depends on the storyteller themselves and the quality of the story.
Right, I completely agree. And then there's also the whole other layer. I know we're talking about content creation, but even if you're an amazing content producer, and we see this happening on YouTube where there are amazing content producers that don't necessarily make enough money to compensate them for what they're doing because they don't have an entire ad sales team behind them and a platform to actually do programmatic buying for all the remnant views. So it's those two sides. It's creating amazing content, getting the inventory there, and then also being able to capitalize on it.
I would say my view on it is that there are always going to be the early adopters who will succeed, and they'll probably be the 1%. If you think in political terms, the 1% on YouTube is maybe 150 creators. I think there's a 1% on Vine, and the faster people jump and can lateral their audiences, I think, and become a master of that platform, I think those are the people that will build businesses first and foremost. Brands will go to them, audiences will find them faster, and then after that 1% has been established, it's just going to get harder and harder. Any other questions?
I think we're ending up.
Last one? Okay, sorry.
No, that's okay. Bring it to a fantastic close. Go.
What set the stage was like tell me that I have to. That was an amazing panel, guys. I really appreciated all of your contributions.
No, I think it was a fantastic panel. I'm sorry, we're a couple minutes over.
Lunch.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.